So you suck at drawing, or you're stuck at drawing and you don't know where to start or how to continue? By the end of this video, I promise you, you know exactly what to focus on, why to focus on it, and how to keep doing it. So I'm gonna break it down into this sort of like 6-step process that I think that's pivotal when you wanna learn to draw and keep drawing consistently to get good. It's actually number 6 to some point. So we'll go over it step by step. Number one is actually to start. Okay, this sounds stupid, but it isn't. Because starting is always the hardest part. You've heard this many times before. It's the same for working out. Like, the starting part is the hardest part. Why? Because especially when you still suck, you know you're going to fail. That's the hardest realization. It's the hardest realization to actually know, I'm going to go into this, I'm going to go into the gym today, I'm going to suck, it's going to hurt, I'm going to take a piece of paper today, and the drawing is going to suck. It's a hard realization, and that's the one you need to get over. The only problem usually is that you're comparing yourself to what you're seeing online. You're seeing all of these amazing drawings, from myself included, and you're thinking like, oh, I can't be like Antonio, because, you know, when I look at my drawing and look at his drawing, it's, you know, my sucks, or I'm not good enough, or whatever artist you're following, you're like, I'm not good enough, I'm never gonna reach that. That's the wrong thinking. It's not about that even. Like, we suck on a daily basis. It's actually why we get to post good drawings, is because we keep sucking until we hit something that's good. And the more you do that, the more decisions you make that actually are good decisions. So in order to get to, let's say, good drawings, the only thing that a good drawing is just an amalgamation of good decisions when you put something on paper. When you start out, it's like a bunch of really bad decisions all the way through. So I'm just gonna do bad decisions all the way through. And there's like, it's like the percentage is 99% bad decisions, and maybe 1% is good decision, but it's like a stroke of luck. Now, the better you get, those bad decisions, so the bad decisions actually get diminished to, you know, let's say 50% at some point. And then they get diminished to 20% or 30%. And then there's like 10%. And that's actually what you're doing. You're eliminating bad decisions. That's why you need to start every day. So number 2, and this is the crucial one, is learning the actual fundamentals. So the actual. I can draw, I can't write, okay? Don't blame me. Actual fundamentals. This is pretty crucial because I think there's a lot of, I wouldn't say misinformation thrown around there, but there's a lot of information thrown in your face online in the drawing community, or in the art community in general. Everyone from the professional to your sister next door is giving art advice on what you should be doing. And to some degree, what I don't like about the art community in general is that because it's a creative industry, it's sort of this ethereal, goody-good kind of community. It's like, oh no, everything goes, you know, your creativity, it's all about you just expressing yourself. I mean, to a certain degree, you're right. I mean, if you want to keep drawing like a 5-year-old, be my guest. You can express yourself however you want. But there are actual fundamentals that are guaranteed to make you better. And that's just a fact. I've been a professional for a good over 8 years in the concept art industry. I know what it takes to actually get good at putting things on paper that look believable, realistic, cool, even though they're fantastical or drawn from imagination. And there's actual fundamentals that you can learn. And you know, when we talk about this, I feel like I've almost perfected this with Artwod, is that we take an approach of first learning how to construct, because we need to learn how to construct, meaning that we need to use like simple building blocks like boxes and cylinders. And we need to be able to put those together in perspective, right? That's the thing. It's like, can we put these together and make them look believable on paper? That's all we're doing. We're taking these simple forms, combining them together to see if we can make something that looks believable. And we're not doing anything else. That's what we're focusing on. We can do it in a fun way, right? That's why we have the roadmap, is to put those elements in scenes where they have more context. So we'll put cylinders in the hands of a cool character so that you can see like, okay, this is how these two fit together. That's what you should do, learning how to construct. Then next to that is learning how to deconstruct. And so that's actually all we're doing, is like construction and deconstruction. So that means is that once we understand how to construct these things in space, we're gonna learn how to deconstruct them, which actually means is that we're gonna first learn how to manipulate these forms, meaning that we're gonna slice them off, we're going to cut them in half, we're going to change their contour lines, we're going to change all of that. It's basically the contour manipulation techniques that we teach. That, but also learning how to deconstruct what we see. And this is very, very important. So learning how to really observe the world. Because I see a lot of people talking about, I can't imagine things. I have this sort of aphasia or aphantasia thing. And that's just because you're not learning how to deconstruct things. You're not learning how to look at something, deconstruct it into its simple manipulated forms, and then reconstruct it on paper. So that's a pivotal thing. And for me, those are the actual fundamentals before you do anything else. Of course, there's shading, there's design, there's anatomy, there's all of that. And those are the buzzwords that get thrown into your face. But for me, they're nowhere near as important as the actual fundamental, that is construction and deconstruction. That's what we call a fundamental. A fundamental is the foundational base on which you build your house. And for me, design, composition, anatomy, all of that is the first part of the house, but it's not the foundation. The foundation is to learn to construct and deconstruct. When you can do that, then you can do anything. Because then nothing seems impossible to learn. Because once you understand how to construct forms, put them in space, deconstruct them, look at something, deconstruct it into its simplest forms, you can actually start to learn anatomy. Because you're no longer looking at anatomy as complex muscles attaching to bones. You're looking at it as shapes manipulated in space having a certain form. And once you understand that, it's much easier to remember anatomy, first and foremost, and it's much easier to start drawing it, especially from imagination. It's the same for composition, because composition is basically putting elements in the canvas in a certain order. If you're unable to put elements in space in the first place, you're gonna have a hard time with composition anyway. Even if it's 2D design, it's still about having spatial awareness of where to put all of these things. So number 2 is by far for me, of course, the most important, because that's the actual application of learning to draw. Number 3 is to draw everything, not just what you want. What do I mean by that? When you want to get better at drawing, what you usually do is you get inspired by cool character design, right? And so you want to learn character design, and that's fine. That's the end goal, right? There always should be an end goal. But to get to the end goal is not by only focusing on the end goal. So that means that if you want to get better at character design, it doesn't necessarily mean you only draw characters. Because the pitfall you fall into is that you start to take shortcuts in how to get faster towards the character. And so again, you're going to skip a lot of the actual fundamentals, and it's not going to inform the things that it needs to inform in order to get to your character designs. So meaning that if you want to draw or learn to draw characters, you should still focus on learning to deconstruct vehicles, or learning to deconstruct animals, or learning to deconstruct any mechanical object, or just everyday simple objects. because that will better inform your deconstruction, techniques and skill, but it will also help inform the things you want to do with your character designs, and vice versa. If you want to do cool mech designs, it's almost pivotal that you learn anatomy, right? And so sometimes I see people really struggle with this. They're like, oh, I want to do cool mech designs, and then their mech designs have no information about anatomy. And the most cool mech designs you see, whether it's in film or in games or in cool drawings, a lot of them are based on things that are nothing to do with mechanical design. They're based on cool plants or animals or the anatomy of the body. So you see that all these things inform each other. And when you neglect that, you actually neglect a big part of what you need to do in order to get better with drawing. So number 3 is very important. Draw everything, especially in your foundational years, not just the things you want to draw. At some point, when you get better and when you get really confident with your drawings, you can just focus on the things you want, because at some point, especially when you want to create your own voice, you're going to have to, or not have to, but you're going to want to specialize in something that you can then really become an expert in, because only when it comes to expertise, or when you start really deep diving into a certain subject, you can give it your own spin. You can experiment with techniques or shapes or whatever you want and create your own unique voice. You don't do that when you're a beginner. I mean, you can experiment with it. Don't take me the wrong way. You can experiment with it, but you cannot expect, if we compare it to, let's say, some type of fighting style, or even some type, like say golf, is like, if you're a beginner in any of these endeavors, you're not going to create your own golf style or your own fighting style. Like, you have to learn those fundamentals. And once you understand those fundamentals, you can go down a certain path or venue and then really become an expert in that and change it up, give it your own spin, give it your own techniques or whatever, and create your own voice. But you only do that when you get proficient at these things. So draw everything, not the things you want to draw. Number 4 is limitation. And limitation of limit what you want to learn. So what you want to learn, limit what you, I'm just going to write some keywords. Limit what you learn what, basically, and how you learn it. What I mean by this is that you want to limit the things that give you a hard time, again, starting in the first place. If you're like, oh, I want to do digital, and I want to do inking, and I want to do traditional painting, and I want to do all of this, like if we're talking about mediums, then again, you're making your decisions harder to start, right? If you have too many options, chances are you'll take none of them, right? This is like the Netflix principle. There's too many options, you're like, I have nothing. Or when there's too many clothes in your closet, you're like, I have nothing to wear, because it's like decision paralysis. So you have to limit how you're going to learn something. So limit the tools you're going to use. That can be digital, it can be traditional, doesn't matter, but limit them so that the decision making to start becomes easier. And then secondly, also limit what you learn in terms of how you want to deep dive into certain subjects. So I know that, in number 3 I said draw everything, but what I mean is, like, when you focus on something, focus on it for an intense period of time and then do something else. And I think if you look back at some videos where my friend Adam Duff talks about how I went about learning, is, let's say I was drawing whatever, and at some point I find a weakness that I'm really bad at. I'm like, I still suck at hands. Well, because I still suck at hands, I'm like, okay, this week I'm gonna limit myself to only hands for the entire week with just like a pen or a fine liner, doesn't matter, right? So I limited myself. I only have 2 choices. Well, I have 1 choice, do hands with fine liner. And I do that for a week. This one will prevent your art block, because you know exactly what to do, when to do it. And it will make you much better, much faster because you're deep diving into a specific thing for a certain period of time. And this is really important because our brains, or like our memory, in order for something to become a habit, we need to fill almost like a tub. And I call this, I have problems with this a lot, by the way, is we have sort of our habitual pool, right? Let's say it's a water pool. And then we have sort of the short-term memory pool, right? Now this one is bigger than the other one, but it's just for analogy's sake. However, this one, right, feeds into this one, like that. So what happens when you just do drawing hands for a day is that you fill this pool up here. And you cannot fill it into your long-term memory. And if you do it 2 days, you're still not filling it. But if you would do it intensely for a week or maybe 2 weeks, like whatever length of time you need, you will fill that pool, and eventually you will overflow information, but only parts of it, into that long-term memory pool. And once it's in there, it's not getting out very easily unless you stop for a very long time. So again, that feeds into the thing, like you have to start. But you'll flow like 20% of that information that you've been learning into that long-term memory pool. And then once you repeat that and do that often, it will become much easier to get into that long-term memory pool. And it will become easier to remember things and draw things from imagination, or just in whatever way you want to draw them. So your long-term memory is something that you have to upkeep. You have to upkeep it. You cannot just rely on learning something one day and think it will stay in there forever, right? And that's what a lot of people do wrong, is that one day they're like, oh, I'm super inspired by this artist on Instagram, so I'm just gonna learn what they're doing, whatever they're doing. And then the next day you hear advice from someone else and you're like, oh, no, now I'm gonna do that, right? I'm only gonna focus on that. And then what you're basically doing is you're wasting study time. That's what you're doing, you're wasting study time. So limit what you learn for a certain period of time and limit how you learn it. Again, you're creating almost no space for decision paralysis, right? It's like, okay, I have to do this that way for a certain amount of time. Then number 5 kind of feeds into everything I've said, but it's like, stop copying artists all the time, okay? A lot of you I know that are super inspired by anime or whatever, fantastical drawings or whatever you want to learn. It's fine, but only copy, especially in your formative years, only copy artists as a study. I still do this, right? And we still teach this. It's our emulation phase at Artwod. It's like, you copy artists when you need to, when you want to get crucial pieces of information out of their art. But copying for the sake of copying, just to get something done on paper, is not actually making you better at art. It's just making you it's almost giving you like a dopamine hit of like, well, at least I'm not going to suck today, right? It's that thing of, I don't want to start really because I know I'm going to do something bad. So what I'm going to do is just copy an artist, because at least I'm going to get somewhere near of what they're doing. And I'm going to be fairly pleased with the result because I look up at them. And it's not a really healthy habit, because what you're doing is you're not really learning. You're just learning to copy. And that's not really good. You want to learn fundamentals. You want to learn crucial information. You want to learn things about art that actually are useful. And when you study an artist, so not copy, when you study an artist, you grab from your pool of fundamental knowledge and see how that artist was actually applying it. I do this a lot, but when I do it, I'm copying an artist and I'm looking at it and seeing like, okay, they are using forms in this way. They're probably manipulating, they're deconstructing form in that way. And that gives me the power to do it later in my art in whichever way I see fit. And that's studying. Copying is just, okay, that line goes over here, that line goes over there. He puts that color on top, then he does a bit of shading here, blah, blah, blah. And I get the result they have, you know, one for one. But you didn't learn anything. You just copied what you saw. And in the beginning, we all do this, and I'm not saying like stop doing it entirely if it gives you joy. I mean, we're still doing art. This is still for fun. So if it gives you joy, but you're here, you're watching this because you want to learn how to get better. And what I'm saying is, if you want to get better, then stop copying. Just learn to study artists in a limited amount of ways and actually focus on the fundamentals. And then number 6, I'll have to draw that over here. Number 6 is consistency over intensity. So consistency over intensity, this speaks for itself, but I feel like I have to repeat it a lot of the times, is this comes down to, again, number 1, right? It all ties together, is starting every day, even though for 10 minutes is much better than doing 5 hours 1 day a week. And the reason for that, again, has to do with this short-term memory thing flowing into the long-term memory. But also, like, at some point you have diminishing returns when you do something very intensively, but only once a week or very sporadically. Again, if I have to make the comparison with training, what I've learned getting older is that I'd much rather train 5 days a week at low intensity, but consistently, than doing very high intensity stuff only 2 days a week. It wrecks my body, and I'm not really growing, especially for longevity. And it's the same with art. If you fry your brain 1 day a week with 4 hours of grinding, but then nothing, you're losing a lot of information. And again, you get less motivated to do it over and over and over because you know, like, oh, I have to grind for 4 hours again. Whereas instead, if you focus just on the consistency of actually starting, focusing on the actual fundamentals, drawing everything, not just the things you want, but limiting what you learn and how you learn it, and you stop copying other artists, and you do that consistently, you will get so much better at art in such a short period of time, you won't even believe it yourself. It's the reason we created the roadmaps at Artwod, to give you, in a bite-sized way, go from one point to the next in a consistent way, learning the actual fundamentals, doing the things you need to do at the right time. And if you do that, the universe will come together and you'll be drawing amazing artwork in no time. And that's the reason I wanted to give you sort of these 6 points. It's not actual steps, it's just like 6 things of advice that I would tell you to do, to apply when you want to get better at art, or if you have the feeling right now that you suck at art or you stuck at what you're doing. This template will be like a Bible to you to really get good in a short amount of time. All right, so as I said, after watching this video, do number 1, start with the actual fundamentals. Have fun.